My name is Sofia Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm standing outside the wrought iron gates of my family's Beverly Hills mansion, watching through the bars like some kind of criminal. Inside, champagne flows freely as 200 guests celebrate my brother Nathan's promotion to CEO of our family's real estate empire. The party cost $500,000, and every detail screams luxury, from the ice sculptures to the live orchestra. But here's the thing that makes my blood boil: security guards are stationed at every entrance with explicit orders to keep me out. My own parents hired them to ban me from my brother's celebration. 20 minutes ago, I received a phone call that's about to change everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we dive into this story of betrayal, family secrets, and the revenge that's been years in the making, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Make sure you subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory, and you won't want to miss a single shocking detail about how my family's perfect facade came crashing down. Growing up in the Martinez household was like living in two completely different worlds, depending on which child you were. Nathan, my older brother by 3 years, existed in a realm of endless privilege and unconditional love. From the moment he could walk, our parents Margaret and William treated him like he was destined for greatness. Private tutors, elite boarding schools, summer camps in Switzerland, and a brand new BMW for his 16th birthday were just the beginning. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated with elaborate parties and expensive rewards. When Nathan graduated high school with mediocre grades, our parents threw a graduation bash that rivaled some weddings I've attended. Meanwhile, I lived in what felt like the servants' quarters of the same house. Don't get me wrong, we weren't poor by any means. Our family owned Martinez Real Estate Development, a company that had been building luxury condominiums and commercial properties across California for over 30 years. The business was worth millions, and our lifestyle reflected that wealth. But when it came to how that wealth was distributed between their children, the disparity was staggering and impossible to ignore. While Nathan received a full ride through college, complete with a generous monthly allowance and a luxury apartment near campus, I worked 3 jobs to pay my way through state school. I spent my evenings waiting tables at a local diner, my weekends tutoring high school students in mathematics, and my summers working as a receptionist at a law firm downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was grinding away at minimum wage jobs while my parents' company generated millions in revenue annually. Every time I asked for help with tuition or even just gas money, I was met with lectures about the importance of self-reliance and building character through hard work. The promises, though, were what kept me going through those exhausting years. Both Margaret and William repeatedly assured me that their different treatment was simply a matter of teaching us different life lessons. Nathan needed to learn leadership and confidence, they explained, while I needed to develop independence and resilience. They swore that when it came time for the inheritance, everything would be split equally. The family business would belong to both of us, and we'd work together to continue building the Martinez legacy. Those promises felt like light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. After graduating with a degree in accounting and later earning my certification as a forensic accountant, I finally thought my hard work was paying off. I landed a prestigious position at a downtown firm that specialized in investigating financial crimes and corporate fraud. The irony of my career choice would become apparent much later. My expertise in uncovering hidden assets and fraudulent transactions made me exceptionally good at my job, and I quickly gained a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and absolutely incapable of being bought or intimidated. But even as my career flourished, the family dynamics remained unchanged. Nathan coasted through a business degree at an expensive private university, funded entirely by our parents, and was immediately handed a vice president position at Martinez Real Estate upon graduation. He had no experience, no proven track record, and frankly, no particular aptitude for business. His idea of market research involved asking his golf buddies what they thought about potential development sites. Yet our parents acted as if he was the second coming of Donald Trump, praising his every decision and constantly talking about his brilliant business instincts. The breaking point came 6 months ago when Nathan was promoted to Chief Executive Officer, effectively making him the head of the entire family empire. The announcement was made at a family dinner, and I'll never forget the way my parents beamed with pride as they talked about Nathan's vision for the company's future. When I asked about my own role in the business, suggesting that my financial expertise could be valuable in the executive suite, the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Margaret's response was swift and cutting. She explained that the business needed strong leadership, not number crunching, and that my skills were better suited for working for other people rather than running a family enterprise. William, ever the peacemaker, tried to soften the blow by suggesting that I could perhaps handle some bookkeeping tasks on a contract basis if Nathan decided the company needed outside accounting services. The dismissal was complete and devastating, made worse by Nathan's smug smile as he savored his parents' unwavering support. That night marked the beginning of my deeper investigation into our family's finances, though I had no idea at the time where that investigation would lead me. Something about their reaction felt wrong, defensive in a way that went beyond simple favoritism. My forensic accounting instincts, honed by years of uncovering corporate malfeasance, started tingling. When people get that defensive about keeping someone away from the books, it usually means those books have something to hide. My investigation into the Martinez family finances started innocently enough. As a forensic accountant, analyzing financial records was as natural to me as breathing, and I told myself I was simply trying to understand the business that would supposedly be half mine someday. Using my professional access to various financial databases and my expertise in following money trails, I began piecing together a picture of our family's wealth that was far more complex and troubling than I had ever imagined. What I discovered over the next several weeks made my blood run cold. The Martinez Real Estate Development Company wasn't just building condominiums and office complexes. It was serving as a sophisticated money laundering operation for several criminal organizations operating throughout California. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. Dirty money would come in through shell companies purchasing properties at inflated prices, then get cleaned through a series of legitimate real estate transactions before emerging as pristine investment returns. The paper trail was meticulous once I knew what to look for. Properties purchased for $2 million with cash from mysterious LLCs, then immediately sold to other shell companies for $4 million, then flipped again to legitimate buyers for $3 million. On the surface, it looked like the natural fluctuations of a hot real estate market. But when I mapped out the ownership structures of these shell companies and traced their banking relationships, a clear pattern emerged. The Martinez family wasn't just facilitating these transactions, they were taking substantial fees for providing the laundering services. But the money laundering was just the beginning. As I dug deeper into the financial records, I uncovered evidence of systematic tax evasion spanning decades. The family had been underreporting income, hiding assets in offshore accounts, and claiming fraudulent deductions that saved them millions in taxes over the years. The sophistication of the operation suggested they had professional help from someone with extensive knowledge of both criminal law and international finance. When I finally worked up the courage to approach my parents with these concerns, I genuinely believed they might be victims rather than perpetrators. Perhaps someone in their organization was using the company for illegal activities without their knowledge. Maybe they were being extorted or threatened. I scheduled a lunch meeting with both Margaret and William, preparing a presentation that laid out the evidence in a clear, non-accusatory way that gave them every opportunity to explain or seek help. Their reaction was nothing like what I had expected. Instead of shock or gratitude for bringing these issues to light, I was met with cold fury and immediate denial. Margaret accused me of trying to undermine Nathan's leadership by spreading malicious lies about the family business. William questioned my motives and suggested that my jealousy over Nathan's promotion had driven me to fabricate evidence against them. They both insisted that I was misinterpreting legitimate business transactions and that my accusations were not only wrong but potentially libelous. But it was what happened after our lunch meeting that truly opened my eyes to the depth of the conspiracy I had uncovered. Within 48 hours of my presentation, I received a call from the managing partner at my accounting firm. Someone had contacted them with serious allegations about my professional conduct, claiming that I had been using company resources to conduct unauthorized investigations into private citizens. The caller, who identified himself as the family's attorney, suggested that I might be engaged in corporate espionage or attempting to steal proprietary business information. The accusations were completely fabricated, but they were also expertly crafted to exploit the paranoia that exists in any firm that handles sensitive financial information. My employer couldn't risk being associated with an accountant who might be using her position to spy on clients or steal trade secrets. Despite my 6 years of exemplary service and sterling reputation, I was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into my conduct. Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother and the family's longtime attorney, played a crucial role in orchestrating my professional destruction. Richard had always been the family's fixer, the person they called when legal problems needed to disappear. He had connections throughout the legal and business community, and he knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt about my integrity without making any accusations that could be directly traced back to him. The investigation into my conduct was thorough and humiliating. Every case I had worked on for the past 2 years was reviewed for signs of impropriety. My computer was forensically examined, my phone records were subpoenaed, and my colleagues were interviewed about any suspicious behavior they might have observed. The process dragged on for months, during which time I was prohibited from working on any client matters and my reputation in the industry was systematically destroyed by whispers and innuendo. Eventually, the investigation concluded that there was no evidence of wrongdoing on my part. But by then, the damage was done. The managing partners explained that while they believed in my innocence, the cloud of suspicion surrounding me made it impossible for me to continue working with their high-profile clients. They offered me a generous severance package and a carefully worded letter of recommendation that damned me with faint praise while avoiding any direct accusations. Losing my job was devastating, but it was nothing compared to the betrayal I felt when I realized that my own family had orchestrated my professional destruction. They hadn't just disagreed with my findings or dismissed my concerns. They had actively worked to destroy my career and my reputation in order to silence me. The parents who had raised me, who had supposedly loved me despite their obvious favoritism toward Nathan, were willing to ruin my life to protect their criminal enterprise. As I cleaned out my office and said goodbye to colleagues who looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, I realized that my investigation into the family finances had been much more accurate than I had initially understood. This wasn't just about money laundering and tax evasion. This was about a family that had built their entire fortune on criminal activity and would destroy anyone who threatened to expose them, including their own daughter. The destruction of my career was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war against my existence. With my professional reputation in ruins and my income eliminated, I found myself increasingly isolated and vulnerable to more direct attacks. Nathan, emboldened by the success of the first assault on my livelihood, took a much more aggressive approach to ensuring my silence about the family's criminal activities. The second major attack came 3 months after I lost my job. I had been struggling to find new employment, as word had somehow spread throughout the accounting community that I was under investigation for potential ethical violations. The whisper campaign was subtle but effective, poisoning potential employers against me before I even had a chance to interview. I was living off my savings and growing increasingly desperate when Nathan decided to escalate from professional sabotage to outright criminal framing. On a Tuesday morning in September, I was awakened by violent pounding on my apartment door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with 4 police officers holding a search warrant. They pushed past me into my small studio apartment and began systematically tearing the place apart, looking for what the warrant described as illegal narcotics and drug paraphernalia. I was completely bewildered until one of the officers emerged from my bedroom closet holding a large plastic bag filled with what appeared to be cocaine. The drugs had been planted in a shoebox at the back of my closet, hidden behind winter clothes I hadn't touched in months. The quantity was significant enough to suggest distribution rather than personal use, which meant I was looking at serious federal charges that could result in decades in prison. As the officers read me my rights and placed me in handcuffs, I caught a glimpse of Nathan's car parked across the street from my apartment building. He was sitting behind the wheel with a satisfied smile on his face, watching as his sister was dragged away in handcuffs. The legal proceedings that followed were a nightmare of bureaucracy, expense, and constant fear. Even though I had never used illegal drugs in my life and had absolutely no connection to the cocaine found in my apartment, proving my innocence was far more difficult than I had anticipated. The drugs were real, they were found in my possession, and the prosecution had a compelling narrative about a disgraced accountant who had turned to drug dealing to make ends meet after losing her legitimate career. My court-appointed attorney was overwhelmed with cases and seemed more interested in negotiating a plea bargain than actually fighting the charges. He explained that drug cases were notoriously difficult to defend, especially when the evidence had been found in the defendant's home, and that the prosecution was offering a relatively generous deal of 5 years probation in exchange for a guilty plea. The alternative, he warned, was risking a trial that could result in a 20-year sentence if I was convicted. Fighting the charges meant hiring a private attorney, which required draining what remained of my savings and taking on substantial debt. The legal fees mounted quickly as my lawyer worked to challenge the evidence and investigate how the drugs had ended up in my apartment. Security camera footage from my building showed Nathan entering the building on 2 separate occasions in the weeks before the raid, but proving that he had planted the drugs was nearly impossible without additional evidence. Meanwhile, my parents maintained complete radio silence. They changed the locks on all family properties, including the vacation home where I had spent summers as a child, and instructed their staff that I was not welcome under any circumstances. When I tried calling their house, I was told by the housekeeper that Margaret and William were not available to speak with me and that future calls would be forwarded to their attorney. The message was clear: I had been completely disowned by the family that had raised me. Jennifer, Nathan's wife, took particular pleasure in spreading vicious rumors throughout our extended social circle. She organized lunch meetings with women who had known me since childhood, carefully planting seeds of doubt about my character and suggesting that my legal troubles were evidence of a long-hidden drug problem. According to Jennifer's version of events, my parents had tried for years to get me help for my addiction, but I had refused treatment and become increasingly unstable and dangerous. The social ostracism was almost as painful as the legal troubles. Friends I had known for decades stopped returning my calls. Invitations to parties and social events dried up completely. Even casual acquaintances crossed the street to avoid having to speak with me. The Martinez family's influence in our community was extensive, and their version of events carried more weight than my protestations of innocence. As the months dragged on and my legal bills continued to mount, I found myself sliding into a deep depression. The combination of unemployment, legal troubles, social isolation, and family betrayal created a perfect storm of despair that threatened to overwhelm me completely. I spent most days in my apartment, afraid to go out in public where I might encounter former friends who now viewed me as a criminal. Sleep became elusive, and when I did manage to fall asleep, I was plagued by nightmares about prison and courtrooms and my family's faces filled with contempt. It was during this darkest period that Marcus Reed entered my life, though his arrival was so unexpected that I initially thought it might be another trap set by my family. Reed was a private investigator with an impressive resume and an expensive suit who approached me one afternoon as I was leaving my attorney's office. He claimed to have been investigating the Martinez family for several months as part of a larger case involving organized crime and money laundering in Southern California. Reed's proposition was both intriguing and terrifying. He believed that my family was involved in criminal activities far more extensive than I had discovered, and he thought my inside knowledge of their operations could be invaluable to his investigation. In exchange for my cooperation, he offered to help prove my innocence in the drug case and provide protection from further attacks by my family. He also hinted that there might be financial compensation available if his investigation was successful. The decision to trust Reed wasn't easy. After months of betrayal and false allegations, I had developed a profound skepticism about anyone who claimed to want to help me. But Reed had done his homework, and he was able to provide details about my family's business operations that convinced me he wasn't working for them. He also showed me evidence of similar tactics being used against other people who had threatened to expose the Martinez family's criminal activities, including 2 former employees who had been framed for embezzlement after discovering irregularities in the company's books. Working with Reed meant acknowledging that my family wasn't just guilty of financial crimes but was actively engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior that included witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. It meant accepting that the people who had raised me were not just flawed or misguided but were genuinely dangerous individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their criminal empire. Most importantly, it meant committing to a course of action that would likely destroy any possibility of reconciliation with my family, even if I was somehow able to prove my innocence. But as I sat in Reed's car outside my attorney's office, looking at photographs of other victims of my family's crimes, I realized that reconciliation had never really been an option. My parents and Nathan had already made their choice when they decided to destroy my life rather than address the criminal activities I had uncovered. Now it was time for me to make my choice about how I was going to fight back. Working with Marcus Reed opened my eyes to the true scope of my family's criminal enterprise and revealed secrets about my own identity that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Reed's investigation had been ongoing for 8 months before he approached me, and the evidence he had compiled painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond money laundering and tax evasion. The Martinez family had built their fortune on a foundation of fraud, extortion, and exploitation that stretched back decades. The most shocking revelation came when Reed showed me documents related to a car accident that had occurred 25 years earlier. According to the police reports and insurance records, David and Elena Castellanos had died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver while returning from their daughter's 3rd birthday party. The daughter, Sofia Castellanos, had survived the crash but sustained serious injuries that required months of hospitalization and rehabilitation. What made these documents so significant was that the little girl in the hospital photographs looked exactly like me at that age. Reed had spent weeks verifying the information before approaching me with his suspicions, and the evidence was overwhelming. DNA testing would be required for absolute confirmation, but the circumstantial evidence was compelling enough to convince both of us that I was Sofia Castellanos, not Sofia Martinez. The Martinez family had somehow taken custody of me after my real parents' death and had hidden my true identity for 25 years. The financial implications of this discovery were staggering. David Castellanos had been a successful investment banker with substantial assets, including a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate investments. Elena had inherited a family construction business that specialized in luxury residential developments. Together, they had established a trust fund for their daughter that was worth approximately $3 million at the time of their death. With 25 years of growth and compound interest, that trust fund was now valued at over $50 million. But the money wasn't the most disturbing part of Reed's investigation. As we dug deeper into the circumstances surrounding my adoption, we uncovered evidence that my parents' death might not have been the random accident it appeared to be. The drunk driver who caused the collision had been an employee of a construction company that was competing with Elena's business for a major development contract. The accident had occurred just days before the final contract negotiations, and Elena's death had cleared the way for her competitor to secure the lucrative deal. Reed's contacts in law enforcement had helped him access records that were normally sealed, and what he found suggested that the Martinez family had been involved in the contract dispute and might have had inside information about the planned accident. William Martinez had been a junior partner in a law firm that represented several construction companies at the time, and his client records showed connections to both the competitor who benefited from Elena's death and the drunk driver who caused the accident. Nathan's involvement in the cover-up was particularly disturbing because it revealed how long he had known the truth about my identity. Reed's investigation uncovered evidence that Nathan had discovered my real identity during college when he had access to family legal documents for a business law class. Instead of telling me the truth, he had used the information to blackmail our parents for a larger share of the family inheritance and greater control over the business operations. The blackmail explained so much about the family dynamics I had never understood. Nathan's confident assumption that he would inherit everything wasn't based on favoritism or gender bias. It was based on his knowledge that I wasn't legally entitled to any of the Martinez family assets because I wasn't actually a Martinez. His smug superiority throughout our childhood now made perfect sense. He had known all along that he was the only legitimate heir to the family fortune. Uncle Richard's role as the family attorney took on a much more sinister cast when Reed revealed that he had been the mastermind behind the financial crimes that funded the family's lifestyle. Richard had used his legal expertise and professional connections to establish the money laundering operation, set up the offshore accounts for tax evasion, and create the complex web of shell companies that hid the family's criminal activities from law enforcement scrutiny. The third major attack on my life came just as Reed and I were beginning to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. Someone broke into my apartment while I was meeting with Reed at his office, staging the scene to look like a burglary while actually planting additional evidence that could be used against me in future criminal proceedings. The intruders were professionals who knew exactly what they were looking for and how to avoid the building's security cameras. Among the items planted in my apartment were forged bank statements showing large cash deposits that coincided with known drug trafficking activities, fake identification documents with my photograph but different names, and correspondence suggesting that I had been planning to flee the country to avoid prosecution. The evidence was sophisticated enough to fool a casual investigation, and it created a narrative that I was not just a drug dealer but a flight risk who might be involved in international criminal activities. The false restraining orders came next, filed by Jennifer and supported by sworn statements from Nathan and my parents alleging that I had been making threatening phone calls and showing up at family properties in violation of their wishes. The restraining orders were designed to prevent me from getting close enough to any family member to confront them about what I had learned, while also creating a legal paper trail that supported their claims that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. Reed explained that these tactics were classic examples of how criminal organizations neutralize threats from within their own families. By systematically destroying my credibility, isolating me from potential allies, and creating a legal framework that painted me as the aggressor, they were ensuring that any accusations I made would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a mentally ill drug addict who was trying to deflect attention from her own criminal behavior. The sophistication of the operation suggested that my family had used these tactics before, and Reed's investigation was already uncovering evidence of other individuals who had threatened to expose the Martinez family's crimes and had subsequently faced similar campaigns of destruction. 2 former business partners had been driven to bankruptcy through frivolous lawsuits and fraudulent accusations. A whistleblowing employee had been framed for embezzlement and had served 3 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. A journalist who had been investigating the family's real estate deals had been arrested for stalking after someone had used his identity to make threatening communications. The pattern was clear and terrifying. My family wasn't just protecting their criminal enterprise, they were systematically destroying anyone who posed a threat to their operations. The fact that they were willing to use these tactics against their own daughter demonstrated the complete absence of normal family loyalty and the purely transactional nature of their relationships. I wasn't their daughter, I was a potential witness who needed to be neutralized before I could damage their business. As Reed and I planned our next steps in the investigation, I realized that we weren't just fighting to clear my name or recover my stolen inheritance. We were taking on a criminal organization that had spent decades perfecting their methods for destroying their enemies. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the odds seemed overwhelmingly stacked against us. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I wasn't fighting alone. The relentless attacks on my life, career, and sanity finally reached a breaking point that pushed me to the darkest moment of my existence. The combination of legal troubles, social isolation, financial ruin, and the devastating revelations about my true identity had worn down my psychological defenses until I felt completely defeated and hopeless. The fourth major attack came in the form of sophisticated identity theft that emptied my remaining bank accounts and destroyed what little financial security I had left. I discovered the theft on a Monday morning when my debit card was declined at a coffee shop where I had been a regular customer for years. The humiliation of having my card rejected in front of people who knew me was nothing compared to the shock I felt when I checked my bank account and found it completely empty. Not only had someone withdrawn every dollar from my checking and savings accounts, but they had also taken out cash advances on my credit cards and applied for new loans using my social security number. Reed's investigation quickly revealed that Nathan had been systematically using my personal information to establish fraudulent business accounts and secure loans that he had no intention of repaying. The identity theft was sophisticated enough to fool multiple financial institutions, and the paper trail had been carefully constructed to make it appear that I was the one responsible for the fraudulent activity. When I tried to report the theft to the police, I was told that the evidence suggested I might be filing a false report to cover up my own financial crimes. The eviction notice came 3 days later. Without any income and with my bank accounts emptied, I had fallen behind on my rent, and my landlord had decided to cut his losses by removing me from the property. The legal process moved quickly, and within 2 weeks I found myself packing my few remaining possessions into garbage bags and moving into a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. The motel was the kind of place where people paid by the week and didn't ask questions about each other's backgrounds. My health was deteriorating rapidly under the constant stress of legal troubles, financial ruin, and family betrayal. I had developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away, my hair was falling out in clumps, and I was losing weight at an alarming rate because I could barely afford to eat 1 meal a day. The panic attacks were becoming more frequent and more severe, sometimes lasting for hours and leaving me completely exhausted and unable to function. It was during one of these panic attacks, as I sat on the floor of my dingy motel room contemplating whether life was worth living anymore, that Mrs. Chen knocked on my door. She was an elderly Chinese woman who lived in the room next to mine, and she had been concerned about the sobbing and hyperventilating she could hear through the thin walls. When I opened the door, she took one look at my condition and immediately insisted on sitting with me until the panic attack subsided. Mrs. Chen had her own tragic story of family betrayal and financial ruin, and she recognized the signs of someone who was being systematically destroyed by people they had trusted. She had fled China decades earlier after her own family had stolen her inheritance and tried to have her committed to a mental institution when she threatened to expose their corruption. Her kindness and understanding provided a lifeline at exactly the moment when I was ready to give up completely. It was Mrs. Chen who suggested that I might benefit from talking to a journalist she knew who specialized in investigating family financial crimes. Isabella Torres was an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times who had built her career exposing corruption in wealthy families and powerful institutions. Mrs. Chen had met Torres while being interviewed for a story about elderly immigrants who had been victimized by financial scams, and she believed that my case might be exactly the kind of story that Torres would want to pursue. Torres arrived at my motel room on a Thursday afternoon, and I could tell immediately that she was different from the other journalists who had occasionally tried to interview me about my legal troubles. She didn't seem interested in sensationalizing my story or painting me as either a victim or a villain. Instead, she asked detailed questions about the financial evidence I had uncovered, the timeline of attacks against me, and the connections between my family's business operations and organized crime. What made Torres particularly valuable as an ally was that she had been investigating several cases involving money laundering through Southern California real estate developments, and she already had substantial evidence of criminal activity in the industry. My family's name had come up multiple times in her research, but she hadn't been able to find anyone willing to speak on the record about their operations. My insider knowledge of their business practices and my access to financial records made me an invaluable source for her ongoing investigation. Torres also brought resources that Reed and I desperately needed. As an investigative journalist with a major newspaper, she had access to legal databases, court records, and public documents that were difficult for private individuals to obtain. She also had connections with law enforcement agencies, federal prosecutors, and other journalists who were investigating related cases. Most importantly, she had the platform and credibility to bring public attention to the story in a way that would be difficult for my family to suppress or discredit. The partnership between Reed, Torres, and myself represented a significant escalation in our fight against my family's criminal enterprise. We were no longer just trying to clear my name or recover my stolen inheritance. We were building a comprehensive case that could potentially bring down the entire organization and hold all the participants accountable for their crimes. The evidence we were gathering could support federal charges for money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, conspiracy, and potentially even murder if we could prove that my real parents' death was not accidental. But our investigation also made us targets for more aggressive retaliation from my family. The fifth major attack came in the form of completely fabricated criminal charges filed by Uncle Richard through his connections in the district attorney's office. The charges alleged that I had been stalking family members, making death threats, and attempting to extort money from them in exchange for keeping quiet about their private business affairs. The arrest warrant was issued on a Friday afternoon, deliberately timed to ensure that I would spend the weekend in jail before being able to appear before a judge. When the police arrived at my motel room, they found me in the company of Reed and Torres, which allowed Uncle Richard to add charges of conspiracy and criminal solicitation to the indictment. According to the prosecution's theory, I had hired Reed to help me stalk my family and had enlisted Torres to publish false and defamatory stories about them. Going into hiding became our only option to avoid arrest and continue the investigation. Torres arranged for us to stay in a safe house owned by a source who had previously helped journalists working on dangerous stories involving organized crime. The safe house was a small cabin in the mountains outside Los Angeles, isolated enough to provide security but close enough to the city to allow us to continue our research and evidence gathering. Living in the safe house marked a turning point in our investigation and in my own psychological recovery. For the first time in months, I felt physically safe from my family's attacks, and the constant companionship of Reed and Torres helped alleviate the crushing isolation that had been destroying my mental health. We established a daily routine of research, evidence analysis, and planning that gave structure to my days and a sense of purpose to my suffering. More importantly, working closely with Reed and Torres helped me understand that my family's crimes extended far beyond their treatment of me. We were uncovering evidence of dozens of victims whose lives had been destroyed by the Martinez criminal enterprise. Elderly investors had lost their life savings to fraudulent real estate schemes. Small business owners had been driven to bankruptcy by frivolous lawsuits designed to eliminate competition. Whistleblowing employees had been framed for crimes they didn't commit and had served prison sentences for the Martinez family's crimes. The scope of the victimization was staggering, and it gave our investigation a moral weight that went far beyond my personal quest for justice. We weren't just fighting to clear my name or recover my inheritance, we were working to hold accountable a criminal organization that had been operating with impunity for decades. The evidence we were gathering could potentially provide justice for dozens of victims and prevent countless future crimes. As we prepared to take our evidence to federal law enforcement, I realized that my journey from victim to investigator had fundamentally changed who I was as a person. The naive young woman who had trusted her family's promises about equal inheritance and fair treatment was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood the true nature of power, corruption, and family loyalty. I had learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually your worst enemies, and that real family is found among the people who stand with you when everyone else abandons you. Our life in the safe house became an intensive crash course in building a federal case against organized crime. Reed's experience as a private investigator, Torres's skills as an investigative journalist, and my expertise as a forensic accountant created a formidable team capable of uncovering and documenting evidence that could bring down my family's criminal empire. Working 18-hour days in the cabin's converted basement, we systematically mapped out 25 years of criminal activity that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of co-conspirators. The charity fraud was perhaps the most morally reprehensible aspect of my family's operations, and it was also the easiest to document with concrete evidence. The Martinez family had established 3 separate charitable foundations that ostensibly supported causes like affordable housing for low-income families, scholarships for underprivileged students, and medical care for uninsured patients. In reality, these foundations were sophisticated money laundering vehicles that allowed the family to convert illegally obtained cash into legitimate tax-deductible donations while providing minimal actual charitable services. Torres's investigation revealed that the Martinez Family Foundation, which claimed to have built over 200 affordable housing units, had actually constructed fewer than 30 substandard apartments that were rented to family members and business associates at below-market rates. The Scholarship Foundation had awarded grants totaling over $5 million, but 90% of the recipients were children of Martinez business partners or employees who were already attending expensive private schools. The medical charity had paid for numerous cosmetic procedures and elective surgeries for wealthy patients while providing virtually no care to the uninsured population it claimed to serve. The documentation of these charity frauds was particularly damaging because it demonstrated the family's willingness to exploit society's most vulnerable populations for their own financial gain. Reed had obtained copies of Foundation board meeting minutes that showed family members joking about the suckers who donated money believing they were helping poor people. The callousness displayed in these documents would be devastating when presented to a jury of ordinary citizens who had made their own charitable contributions in good faith. But the charity fraud was just one component of a much larger pattern of financial crimes that had victimized hundreds of families throughout Southern California. Working with Reed's contacts in law enforcement and Torres's network of sources in the real estate industry, we identified at least 60 separate real estate transactions that had been used to launder money for organized crime families. The total amount of dirty money cleaned through Martinez properties exceeded $50 million, generating substantial fees for the family while corrupting the legitimate real estate market. The most sophisticated aspect of the money laundering operation involved the use of timeshare developments that appeared to be legitimate vacation properties but were actually vehicles for moving cash across international borders. Foreign criminals would purchase timeshare units at inflated prices using untraceable cash, then immediately sell their interests back to Martinez shell companies at a loss, creating paper trails that made the original cash appear to be legitimate investment income. The Martinez family collected fees on both ends of these transactions while helping international crime syndicates integrate their profits into the American financial system. Nathan's drug addiction, which had been carefully hidden from public view, played a crucial role in the family's criminal operations because it provided them with direct connections to drug trafficking organizations that needed money laundering services. Reed's surveillance had documented Nathan's regular meetings with known drug dealers, and financial records showed that his personal expenses far exceeded his legitimate income from the family business. The drug purchases were being funded with money stolen from my trust fund, creating a direct connection between my family's theft of my inheritance and their ongoing criminal activities. Uncle Richard's offshore banking network was the most complex and potentially lucrative aspect of our investigation. Using his legal expertise and international connections, Richard had established accounts in 7 different countries that were known for their banking secrecy laws. The total amount of money hidden in these accounts exceeded $20 million, representing decades of tax evasion and money laundering profits. Reed had managed to obtain partial banking records through his contacts in international law enforcement, but getting complete documentation would require cooperation from federal authorities with treaty relationships in those countries. The pattern of witness intimidation and evidence tampering that I had experienced was not unique to my case. Torres's research had uncovered at least 12 other instances where individuals who had threatened to expose Martinez family crimes had faced similar campaigns of destruction. 2 former business partners had been driven to bankruptcy through frivolous lawsuits and fraudulent accusations. A whistleblowing accountant had been framed for embezzlement and had served 3 years in prison. A journalist investigating the family's real estate deals had been arrested for stalking after someone used his identity to make threatening communications. Each of these cases followed the same basic pattern: initial professional destruction through false accusations and malicious prosecution, followed by planted evidence and fabricated criminal charges, culminating in complete social isolation and financial ruin. The victims who survived the process were too traumatized and impoverished to pose any ongoing threat, while those who might have continued fighting were either imprisoned on false charges or driven to suicide by the relentless pressure. The murder of my real parents was the most serious charge we were building, but it was also the most difficult to prove without additional evidence. The drunk driver who had caused the fatal collision had died in prison 5 years earlier, eliminating our most promising witness. However, Reed had discovered that the driver's widow was still alive and living in Arizona under an assumed name. She had received substantial payments from an unknown source for several years after her husband's death, suggesting that she might have information about who had orchestrated the collision. Our investigation took a dramatic turn when Torres received a tip from one of her law enforcement contacts that the FBI was already investigating the Martinez family as part of a larger organized crime probe. Federal agents had been building a case against the money laundering network for over a year, but they had been unable to penetrate the family's operations or find witnesses willing to testify against them. Our evidence could provide the breakthrough they needed to move forward with indictments. The decision to approach the FBI was both exciting and terrifying. On one hand, federal law enforcement had the resources and authority to protect us from further retaliation while building a comprehensive case against the entire criminal organization. On the other hand, making contact with federal agents would be an irrevocable step that would commit us to a path of total warfare against my family with no possibility of retreat or reconciliation. Torres arranged the initial meeting through her contacts at the Los Angeles Times, who had previously worked with the FBI on investigations involving organized crime and public corruption. The meeting took place at a secure federal facility in downtown Los Angeles, and we were introduced to Special Agent Sarah Chen, who had been leading the federal investigation into money laundering in the Southern California real estate market. Agent Chen's reaction to our evidence was everything we had hoped for and more. She confirmed that the FBI had been investigating the Martinez family for 14 months but had been unable to make significant progress without inside information about their operations. Our documentation of the charity fraud, offshore banking network, and witness intimidation campaign provided exactly the kind of evidence they needed to seek indictments from a federal grand jury. But Agent Chen also warned us that cooperating with the federal investigation would make us permanent targets for retaliation from organized crime figures who had been using Martinez services to launder their money. The family's connections to international drug trafficking and illegal gambling operations meant that our safety would be at risk for years to come, even after successful prosecutions. The FBI could provide protection during the investigation and trial proceedings, but they couldn't guarantee our long-term security once the legal process was complete. The meeting with Agent Chen marked the beginning of a new phase in our fight against my family's criminal empire. We were no longer operating as private investigators trying to clear my name. We were federal witnesses in a major organized crime investigation that could potentially result in dozens of indictments and the dismantling of a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades. The stakes had never been higher, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might actually have a chance to win. The federal investigation moved with surprising speed once Agent Chen had our evidence in hand. Within 2 weeks of our initial meeting, a federal grand jury had been impaneled to hear evidence against the Martinez family and their criminal associates. The scope of the investigation expanded rapidly as FBI agents followed leads provided by our documentation, uncovering additional victims and crimes that we hadn't even known about. The money laundering network was far larger and more sophisticated than any of us had initially realized. Torres's investigative reporting played a crucial role in building public pressure for aggressive prosecution. Her first article, published on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, revealed the basic outlines of the Martinez family's criminal empire and included interviews with several victims who had never previously spoken publicly about their experiences. The story generated national attention and prompted additional victims to come forward with evidence of other crimes committed by the family and their associates. The revelation of my true identity as Sofia Castellanos was perhaps the most shocking aspect of Torres's reporting. DNA testing had confirmed that I was indeed the daughter of David and Elena Castellanos, and the $50 million trust fund that had been stolen from me provided a powerful human interest angle that captured public imagination. The idea that a wealthy family had stolen an orphan child's inheritance while raising her as their own daughter seemed almost too outrageous to believe, but the documentation was overwhelming. Reed's investigation into the murder of my real parents gained new momentum when the FBI's resources were brought to bear on the case. Federal agents were able to access evidence that had been sealed for 25 years, including police reports, insurance records, and witness statements that had never been properly investigated. They also had the authority to compel testimony from witnesses who had previously been unwilling to speak about what they knew. The widow of the drunk driver who had killed my parents proved to be a goldmine of information once federal agents offered her immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation. She revealed that her husband had been paid $10,000 to cause the collision and had been promised that no one would be seriously injured. When the accident resulted in 2 deaths instead of minor injuries, her husband had panicked and confessed everything to her before drinking himself into unconsciousness. The payments she had received after his death were hush money to ensure her continued silence about the planned nature of the collision. Nathan's drug addiction became his undoing as the pressure of the federal investigation intensified. Reed's surveillance had documented his increasingly erratic behavior and escalating drug use, but we hadn't anticipated how quickly he would crack under the stress of knowing that his entire criminal empire was being dismantled piece by piece. His first major mistake was attempting to flee the country using a fake passport, an action that was detected by federal monitoring systems and resulted in his arrest at Los Angeles International Airport. Uncle Richard's attempt to destroy evidence proved to be even more damaging to the family's case. FBI agents conducting a search of his law office discovered that he had been frantically shredding documents and deleting computer files in the days following Torres's first news article. Federal prosecutors were able to charge him with obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence, charges that carried substantial penalties and could be used to pressure him into cooperating with the investigation. The family's panic became increasingly apparent as their carefully constructed facade of respectability began crumbling under public scrutiny. Margaret suffered what appeared to be a nervous breakdown when federal agents arrived at the family mansion with search warrants, and she was hospitalized for several days with what doctors described as stress-induced cardiac episodes. During her hospitalization, she made several statements to nurses and doctors that were later used as evidence of her knowledge of the family's criminal activities. William's attempt to negotiate immunity by betraying his business partners was a desperate move that ultimately backfired spectacularly. He approached federal prosecutors through his attorney and offered to provide evidence against the organized crime figures who had been using Martinez properties to launder money. However, his cooperation offer came too late and provided information that the FBI had already obtained through other sources. Instead of earning immunity, his attempted betrayal only served to confirm his central role in the criminal conspiracy. The offshore banking accounts that Uncle Richard had established became the subject of international law enforcement cooperation as federal agents worked with authorities in multiple countries to freeze the stolen assets. The recovery of over $20 million from these accounts provided concrete evidence of the family's tax evasion and money laundering activities while also demonstrating the international scope of their criminal operations. My vindication in the drug case came when FBI forensic experts were able to prove that the cocaine found in my apartment had been planted there by Nathan. Advanced chemical analysis revealed that the drugs contained trace elements that matched samples seized from a drug trafficking operation that Nathan had been involved with through his criminal associates. Cell phone records also showed that Nathan had been in contact with known drug dealers on the same day that the drugs were planted in my apartment. The false criminal charges that Uncle Richard had filed against me were dismissed when federal prosecutors presented evidence that the accusations were part of a systematic campaign of witness intimidation designed to prevent me from testifying about the family's crimes. The judge who dismissed the charges issued a strongly worded statement condemning the abuse of the legal system to silence crime victims and ordered a criminal investigation into Uncle Richard's conduct as an attorney. Torres's follow-up articles continued to generate public outrage as she revealed additional details about the family's crimes and their impact on victims throughout Southern California. The charity fraud was particularly damaging to the family's reputation because it demonstrated their willingness to exploit society's most vulnerable populations for financial gain. Photographs of the substandard housing that was supposed to represent their charitable work created powerful visual evidence of their complete lack of genuine philanthropic intent. The recovery of my trust fund became a complex legal battle as federal prosecutors worked to trace the stolen money through the maze of shell companies and offshore accounts that the family had used to hide their theft. Forensic accountants were able to demonstrate that approximately $40 million of the original $50 million trust had been stolen over the course of 25 years, with the money being used to fund the family's lavish lifestyle and criminal operations. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the federal investigation was watching the family members turn against each other as the walls closed in around them. Nathan blamed Uncle Richard for masterminding the criminal operations and claimed that he had been coerced into participating through threats against his safety. Margaret accused William of hiding the extent of their criminal activities from her and claimed that she had been an unknowing victim of his deception. Uncle Richard tried to portray himself as a legitimate attorney who had been manipulated by his criminal clients into providing legal services for illegal activities. The infighting among family members provided federal prosecutors with additional evidence as each person's attempt to minimize their own culpability resulted in admissions of guilt regarding other family members' crimes. Phone calls between family members were being recorded by federal agents, and their increasingly desperate conversations provided real-time evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice. As the federal investigation reached its climax, I found myself in the surreal position of watching my former family's entire world collapse while simultaneously reclaiming my true identity and recovering my stolen inheritance. The transformation from victim to witness to survivor had been painful and traumatic, but it had also been empowering in ways I never could have anticipated. For the first time in my life, I understood who I really was and what I was truly capable of achieving when I had the support of people who genuinely cared about justice rather than personal gain. The federal raids were timed to coincide with Nathan's $500,000 celebration party, creating a dramatic climax that none of us could have scripted more perfectly. As 200 of Southern California's most prominent business leaders and social figures gathered in the Martinez mansion to celebrate Nathan's ascension to CEO, FBI agents were positioning themselves around the property with search warrants for the house, the guest house, Uncle Richard's home office, and the family's business headquarters. I was present at the raids as a federal witness, riding in an unmarked FBI vehicle with Agent Chen and Torres, who had been granted special access to document the arrests for her newspaper. The irony was overwhelming as I sat in the car outside the estate where I had grown up, watching through the same iron gates that had excluded me from the celebration just hours earlier. The difference was that this time, I was on the side with the power and the legal authority. The timing of the raids was designed to maximize both the evidentiary value and the psychological impact on the family and their associates. Agent Chen explained that arrests conducted during large social gatherings often yielded additional evidence as panicked suspects attempted to destroy documents or warn co-conspirators in full view of potential witnesses. The presence of prominent community members also ensured maximum publicity for the arrests, sending a clear message to other potential criminals that wealth and social status provided no protection from federal law enforcement. The first sign that something was wrong came when the party's valet parking service was quietly replaced by undercover FBI agents who began systematically photographing the license plates of every vehicle arriving at the celebration. The guests had no idea that their attendance was being documented as potential evidence of association with a criminal enterprise, and the agent serving as head valet was actually recording conversations as wealthy businessmen discussed their dealings with the Martinez family. The actual raids began at exactly 9 p.m., just as Nathan was scheduled to give a speech thanking his family and friends for their support throughout his career. Agent Chen had chosen this timing deliberately, knowing that the entire family would be together in one location and that the shock value of the arrests would be maximized by conducting them in front of Nathan's business associates and social peers. The first wave of agents entered through the main gate, displaying their search warrants to the private security guards who had been hired to keep out unwanted guests like me. The security team was quickly overwhelmed and detained while FBI agents spread throughout the property to secure potential evidence and prevent anyone from leaving. Additional teams of agents simultaneously hit Uncle Richard's house and the family's business offices, ensuring that evidence couldn't be destroyed at secondary locations. I watched from the FBI vehicle as Nathan's celebration turned into chaos. Guests who had been enjoying cocktails and canapés suddenly found themselves being questioned by federal agents and asked to provide identification. Several prominent businessmen who had been using Martinez properties for money laundering purposes were immediately arrested as material witnesses, their shocked faces providing Torres with dramatic photographs for her next day's story. Nathan's reaction to the raids was even more spectacular than we had hoped. When FBI agents approached him during his speech to inform him that he was under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit murder, he completely lost control and began screaming accusations at various family members and business associates. His drug-induced paranoia, combined with the stress of seeing his criminal empire collapse in real time, resulted in a complete psychological breakdown that was witnessed by dozens of prominent community members. The moment I had been anticipating for months finally arrived when Agent Chen escorted me into the mansion as federal agents executed their search warrants. Walking through the front door of the house where I had grown up, now armed with the knowledge of who I really was and what had been stolen from me, felt like the ultimate vindication. The family members who had conspired to destroy my life were now being handcuffed in their own home while I stood as a protected federal witness helping to bring them to justice. Margaret's confrontation with me was perhaps the most emotionally charged moment of the entire evening. When she saw me entering the house with federal agents, she initially tried to maintain the fiction that I was a mentally ill drug addict who was spreading malicious lies about the family. However, when Agent Chen presented her with DNA evidence proving my true identity as Sofia Castellanos and documentation of the stolen trust fund, her facade of maternal concern crumbled completely. The evidence presentation was methodical and devastating. Agent Chen had prepared a comprehensive briefing that laid out 25 years of criminal activity in chronological order, supported by financial records, witness testimony, and physical evidence that had been gathered during months of investigation. Each family member was confronted with specific evidence of their participation in the conspiracy, from Nathan's drug trafficking connections to Uncle Richard's offshore banking network to Margaret and William's theft of my inheritance. Uncle Richard's arrest was particularly satisfying because he had been the mastermind behind so many of the legal tactics used to destroy my life and intimidate other witnesses. When federal agents found him in his home office frantically feeding documents into an industrial shredder, he was immediately charged with destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice in addition to the money laundering and conspiracy charges. His attempt to destroy evidence in the face of a federal search warrant demonstrated a level of panic that undermined any claim that he was an innocent attorney who had been misled by criminal clients. The media circus that erupted around the arrests was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Torres's exclusive access to the raids and her relationship with the key witness made her reporting the definitive account of the Martinez family's criminal empire, and her articles were picked up by news organizations around the world. The story had all the elements that made for compelling journalism: wealthy criminals, stolen inheritance, family betrayal, and ultimate justice. But perhaps the most important aspect of the media coverage was the way it encouraged other victims to come forward with additional evidence of the family's crimes. The publicity surrounding the arrests prompted dozens of people to contact federal authorities with information about fraudulent real estate deals, charity scams, and witness intimidation campaigns that had never been previously reported. The scope of the criminal enterprise was far larger than even our extensive investigation had revealed. Nathan's confession came during his third day in federal custody, after his attorney had informed him that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that his only hope for avoiding a life sentence was to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors. His detailed statement provided investigators with information about criminal activities going back over 15 years and implicated dozens of co-conspirators who had been using Martinez properties for money laundering operations. The confession was particularly damaging because Nathan had been present at family meetings where criminal activities were planned and discussed in detail. He was able to provide specific information about which properties had been used for money laundering, which charity events had been used to defraud donors, and which business associates had been complicit in the various schemes. His intimate knowledge of the family's operations made him an invaluable witness for federal prosecutors. Margaret's attempt to portray herself as a victim of her husband's criminal activities was undermined by financial records showing that she had been actively involved in managing the stolen trust fund money and had personally benefited from the charity fraud schemes. Bank records showed that she had used money stolen from my inheritance to fund her expensive shopping trips, cosmetic procedures, and luxury vacations. Her claims of ignorance were further damaged by recorded phone conversations where she discussed specific criminal activities with other family members. William's negotiation for a plea bargain was complicated by his central role in the original theft of my inheritance and the murder of my real parents. As the attorney who had facilitated the illegal adoption and helped cover up the circumstances of the Castellanos' deaths, he faced potential murder charges in addition to the financial crimes. His attempt to minimize his culpability by blaming Uncle Richard for masterminding the criminal operations was contradicted by evidence showing that he had been an active participant in planning and executing the various schemes. The collapse of the Martinez family's social standing was as dramatic as their legal downfall. Within days of the arrests, they were expelled from country clubs, charitable boards, and social organizations that had previously welcomed their membership and financial contributions. Business partners and associates who had previously courted their friendship now denied having any significant relationship with the family and cooperated eagerly with federal investigators to avoid being charged as co-conspirators. As I watched my former family's world disintegrate around them, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief. The satisfaction came from seeing justice finally served against people who had committed terrible crimes against me and dozens of other victims. The sadness stemmed from the realization that the people I had once loved and trusted had never truly existed. They had been fictional characters created to hide the reality of a criminal organization. The relief came from knowing that I would never again have to fear their retribution or question my own sanity in the face of their manipulations. But most importantly, watching the Martinez family face the consequences of their actions gave me a sense of closure and empowerment that I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I understood that I was not responsible for other people's choices to hurt me, and that speaking the truth about injustice was not a betrayal but an act of courage. The scared, confused young woman who had discovered evidence of money laundering and had tried to do the right thing by approaching her family was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood the true nature of power and justice and who would never again allow herself to be silenced by people who chose criminality over integrity. The legal resolution of the Martinez family criminal enterprise took 18 months to work through the federal court system, but the outcomes exceeded even our most optimistic expectations. Nathan received a 25-year sentence for money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness intimidation. Uncle Richard was sentenced to 30 years for masterminding the criminal operations and for his role in obstructing justice during the federal investigation. Margaret received 15 years for her participation in the charity fraud and theft of my inheritance, while William received 20 years for his central role in the murder conspiracy and illegal adoption. The asset forfeiture proceedings were equally satisfying, as federal prosecutors were able to trace and recover over $60 million in stolen money and illegally acquired property. The family mansion, vacation homes, luxury vehicles, and business properties were all seized and sold, with the proceeds being distributed to victims of the various criminal schemes. The recovery of my trust fund, plus interest and penalties, totaled over $70 million, making me one of the wealthiest young women in Southern California and providing me with the resources to rebuild my life on my own terms. But the financial recovery, while important, was less significant to me than the restoration of my true identity and the validation of my experiences. Learning that I was Sofia Castellanos, the daughter of David and Elena Castellanos, provided answers to questions about myself that I had never even known I had. The personality traits, interests, and abilities that had always seemed so different from the Martinez family now made perfect sense as expressions of my genetic heritage from parents who had been successful, ethical business people. The establishment of the Castellanos Foundation for Justice became my primary focus as I worked to heal from the trauma of my experiences while helping other victims of family financial abuse. The foundation provides legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support to individuals who have been victimized by relatives who have stolen inheritances, committed fraud, or used family relationships to facilitate criminal activities. Working with other survivors has been incredibly therapeutic for me while also serving the broader goal of preventing similar crimes against vulnerable family members. Marcus Reed and Isabella Torres became not just professional allies but genuine friends who helped me navigate the complex process of rebuilding my identity and my life. Reed's investigation had saved my life and my sanity, while Torres's journalism had ensured that the Martinez family's crimes received the public attention necessary to prevent them from escaping justice. Both of them had risked their own safety to help me, and their loyalty and dedication had been instrumental in achieving the positive outcome we had all worked toward. The therapeutic process of healing from 25 years of psychological manipulation and family abuse has been ongoing and challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. Working with trauma specialists who understand the unique dynamics of family betrayal has helped me develop healthy coping mechanisms and relationship skills that I never learned during my childhood. Learning to trust my own perceptions and judgments after years of gaslighting has been particularly difficult, but also essential to my recovery and personal growth. Visiting the grave of my real parents for the first time was an emotionally overwhelming experience that provided a sense of closure I hadn't expected. David and Elena Castellanos had been buried in a small cemetery outside Los Angeles, and their grave had been maintained by a trust fund that Uncle Richard had been secretly stealing from for decades. Standing at their graveside, I was finally able to grieve for the parents I had never known and to honor their memory by ensuring that their deaths had not been in vain. The investigation into my parents' murder had revealed that they had been killed because Elena's construction company was on the verge of exposing a bid-rigging scheme that involved several major contractors, including companies that were connected to the Martinez family's money laundering operations. Their deaths had prevented the exposure of criminal activities that might have unraveled the entire network 25 years earlier, potentially saving dozens of other victims from similar fates. The process of learning about my real parents through interviews with their friends and business associates has been both painful and healing. David had been known for his integrity and his commitment to ethical business practices, while Elena had been a pioneer in promoting women's leadership in the construction industry. Their deaths had been mourned by many people who remembered them as principled individuals who had refused to compromise their values even when facing pressure from criminal organizations. Understanding my parents' legacy has given me a sense of purpose and direction that I had never experienced while believing myself to be a Martinez. The drive for justice and the refusal to be intimidated by powerful criminals are clearly traits that I inherited from David and Elena, and honoring their memory has become a central motivation in my work with crime victims and my advocacy for stronger laws protecting inheritance rights. The relationships I have built with Reed and Torres have taught me what genuine friendship looks like when it's based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine caring rather than manipulation and exploitation. Both of them have continued to be important parts of my life even after the legal proceedings ended, and their friendship has been instrumental in helping me learn to trust people again after experiencing such profound betrayal from my adoptive family. My new understanding of family as something that is chosen rather than simply given by genetics has been one of the most important insights to emerge from this experience. The Martinez family, despite raising me from early childhood, had never truly accepted me as one of their own because they had always known I wasn't entitled to their inheritance. In contrast, Reed and Torres had become family to me through their willingness to risk their own safety and careers to help me find justice. The work of the Castellanos Foundation has introduced me to dozens of other survivors of family financial abuse, and many of these relationships have become important sources of support and inspiration. Hearing other people's stories of betrayal, survival, and recovery has helped me understand that my experience, while unique in its specific details, is part of a much larger pattern of exploitation that occurs when family loyalty is used to facilitate criminal behavior. One of the most rewarding aspects of my foundation work has been helping to change laws and policies that make it easier for families to steal inheritances and abuse their relationships with vulnerable relatives. Working with legislators and law enforcement agencies, we have been able to strengthen reporting requirements for trust fund management, improve investigation procedures for financial elder abuse, and create better protections for whistleblowers who report family financial crimes. The transformation from victim to advocate has been empowering in ways I never could have imagined when I was sitting in that dingy motel room contemplating whether life was worth living. Understanding that my suffering could be used to prevent similar crimes against other people has given meaning to even the most painful aspects of my experience with the Martinez family. Every person we help through the foundation represents a victory against the kind of criminals who believe that family relationships give them license to exploit and abuse vulnerable people. As I sit in my new home, a modest house in a quiet neighborhood far from the Beverly Hills mansion where I grew up, I often reflect on the lessons I've learned about identity, family, and justice. The scared, confused young woman who discovered evidence of money laundering and tried to do the right thing by approaching her family has been replaced by someone who understands that speaking truth to power is never easy but is always necessary when innocent people are being harmed. The most important lesson I've learned is that family is not about blood relationships or legal documents or shared last names. Family is about the people who stand with you when everyone else abandons you, who risk their own safety to protect you when you're vulnerable, and who celebrate your victories while supporting you through your defeats. By that definition, Marcus Reed and Isabella Torres are more truly my family than the Martinez clan ever was, despite having raised me from early childhood. Looking toward the future, I feel optimistic about my ability to build a life based on authentic relationships, meaningful work, and genuine values rather than the facade of respectability that concealed the Martinez family's criminal activities. The foundation provides me with a sense of purpose and connection to something larger than myself, while my personal relationships with Reed, Torres, and other survivors give me the emotional support necessary to continue healing and growing. What happened to me was a terrible injustice that caused years of suffering and nearly destroyed my life. But it also taught me lessons about resilience, courage, and the power of truth that I never could have learned any other way. The Martinez family succeeded in stealing my childhood, my inheritance, and several years of my adult life. But they failed in their ultimate goal of silencing me, and their failure has made it possible for dozens of other victims to find justice and healing. Have you ever discovered that your family was hiding secrets that completely changed your understanding of your own identity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how families can rebuild trust after experiencing betrayal, and whether you think forgiveness is possible when family members commit serious crimes against each other. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people find hope in their own struggles against family abuse. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about survival, justice, and the power of speaking truth even when it's dangerous. Share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges, because sometimes knowing that you're not alone can make all the difference in finding the courage to fight back. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that no matter how powerful your opponents might seem, the truth has a way of eventually rising to the surface. Stay strong, keep fighting for what's right, and never let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires you to stay silent about criminal behavior.